This morning's Dharma talk is titled Perception Impulse. Perception, impulse. Perception, impulse. It is sometimes of the five skandhas or the five heaps: form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness. Sometimes a third one is called perception impulse. Lots of ways of talking about that, thinking about it, reflecting on it, using it as a conceptual dynamic to help you deepen your understanding of who this is, what is actually happening here, what is the fundamental situation that's going on, not your spinning ideas about it. It's interesting, we look at something and then we immediately abandon what we're looking at for something else, something safer, something more secure, something that supports our individual ongoing propaganda about ourselves. There's a way and that seems to have a duration. It seems to, sometimes that perception impulse is immediately corrected. We have the perception, we have the impulse, and then it flips the other way, because in the traditional one is we see a rope on the ground and we think it's a snake. Oh, no, it's not. That's perception impulse. We have a perception, and then all of the dynamics, the whole entire consciousness itself comes to the rescue, so to speak, to let you know what you're seeing. And it does it through basically what we call memory, but that is not just one thing, remembering some other thing. It's everything coming together at once. It's called impulse. Perception, receiving. Impulse, producing. Receiving, producing. Receiving, producing. We're doing it constantly. Another simple way that shows up is like Junshu's story about living in an apartment where they have a cutout of a policeman. Remember that?
Yeah, a cutout of a character from a show.
Character from a show, and when you would come around the corner, you would see it and think it's a real person. And then you think, oh, no, it's not. So it's kind of self-correcting, just because it's obviously an impulse about something. So all that memory of everything is all stored there, and it's pretty hard to stop that. It just continues. There's no time to say, oh no, or unless you even think about it when you you go in the other room and you come back and it'll do it again. You notice that? No. And then I've got a couple more stories here, so it won't be too boring. I have a situation where I actually saw an animal go through that. It was a groundhog. He was about this big standing up, because that's when I met him, he was standing up. I'm in a month-long strict solitary retreat, about 10 miles north of here in the woods in Berry County, in a cabin that I built, 9 by 9, so if you want to call it a cabin, more like a large outhouse. And I was out there, so that fits. And several weeks into it, there's a window that when I started, it was May the 15th and went to June the 15th. So I have, it's hexagonal, so there's a window on every side. There's one wall that has a door in it, and the rest of it are all windows. They came from, I helped some people tear down some forts there's some barracks buildings out to Fort Custer. So I got a few windows and I put them in that shape and put a roof on it and hid out in there for a month. So I'm sitting and I'm looking out the window, and the plants are growing in front of me. Unless you look at a plant for several weeks or a month, you're not going to notice it growing. But I actually watched things grow when I wasn't daydreaming or worrying about stuff or wondering if I was ever going to figure out what the hell this is. And I'm looking and I'm watching, and as as a side, when I started, there was a plant with a leaf about this big, and when I left the retreat, the leaf was about the size of a pancake. I never saw it move. And so that's where I looked. I just looked out there. If I looked up, there was a field out there that I could look across. And this way, I built it right on the edge of the woods. And the crows watched me do that and complained constantly. But the interesting thing is I'm sitting there one day, I don't know when it was, a few weeks in probably, or maybe more, maybe less. watch something moving over here, and I'm watching, and then and then I see something moving. I don't even look over at it. I figure, well, eventually I'll see what it is. I'm looking out the window at these leaves, day after day after day, 8 hours a day, or sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And this animal comes right up to the very window that I'm looking out of, and they have mullions, so there's a window and a window and a window, and then 3 more up here, and then 3 more up here, so it's old-fashioned. So I'm just looking out. I don't look up to see, I just kind of see something moving that way, or this way, and then he, she, they, because it might be a they, stands up and looks in the window. And I'm looking right into its eye. It's just like it couldn't have been choreographed or any better. It's just perfect. I'm looking there. He comes up, they come up, stand up, look in the window right at me, and I see the perception and then the impulse. It's as if the animal looked and thought, human. Because he went, he just bailed immediately, just sprung off in the other direction. But it was very, he must have laughed for 15 minutes about it. Nothing else was funny. Actually, I would sit there for a while and then I would start to chuckle again. Perception impulse. And then we have another one that kind of brought this up this morning. We recently acquired a 200-year-old, another one, you know, like this gentleman here, who's quite old. We just recently acquired another ancient Buddha from China. He's quite a bit smaller, pardon me. But we've been sort of watching him and looking and trying to figure out whether to leave him like it is, which we were, a lot of people wanted us to leave this one like it was. It looked more like an antique. It was all beat up and flaking and coming apart, but we decided not to do that. And this one is, we're trying to understand whether to go leaf the face or leave it all kind of crummy looking or what. So I'll decide that, the way I usually decide things, by not knowing what to do. So the reason I'm bringing that up is we have that sitting, he's only about this wide and about so high, and he's sitting in the you know, kind of an office chair in the living room. So we've both been doing this, coming around the corner out of the bedroom or out of the hallway or what, and seeing him immediately, there's somebody sitting in that chair. So we never come out and say, we just recognize that that's, I don't know, it's probably happened to me 20 times. And it's always like, oh, who is that? So there's a perception of that, and then we immediately go into some kind of grasping about it. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to look at something without impulsively adding something or identifying something or claiming some knowledge about that comes up in the form of just an instantaneity, is that a word? Instantaneity? Well, you know what I mean. It just comes up and there it is. But we never, I don't know, you probably could get used to it eventually, or you would eventually realize when you saw it, well, there's the Buddha again, or there's the rupa, or the form of the Buddha. But that, when I mentioned that, that's when you told me your story, so I didn't hear it from you. But you could do that type of a thing to see that contrast. It's interesting. You see it, and then it immediately resolves itself. You go back into no, that's just that figure, or that's just that silhouette, or just that. What happens? It seems like that our perception. If you have practiced some clarifying your concepts and what you're grasping at, what you're rejecting, what you're believing, what you're not believing, if you're beginning to be more aware of how you are manipulated, your activity is manipulated by the way you grasp and reject. It's not about not doing that, even though it's taught that way, and even though I would say, don't conclude, don't add, don't come to any conclusion about anything. The reason I say that is not because I expect you to necessarily stop doing that, but if I say it that way, then you'll be more and more aware of how much you do that. And I'm not saying it might not slow down some, but if there's a lot of awareness there, it doesn't really need to slow down because the awareness does not need a solution. Your Buddha nature doesn't need something else. Your Buddha nature is not separate from anything else. And if you see it, the work is done. When I say the work is done, that's one way of saying it. The other way of saying it is the work just begins, because now you realize what you're actually here to do, instead of come up with ideas about how to be this and how to be that. How can I? Even people who want to help others are more about wanting to be people who help others rather than fundamentally helping others. If you fundamentally help others, you'll stop meddling with them. People have their own karma. It should be respected. When I say respected, you should see the boundary between yourself and others. If you see that, you see the way in which you're not separate from them. You can't see the way that you're not separate from them by constantly churning out statements like, we're all one. Why can't we all get along? We're all one. We're not all one. That's a misunderstanding. And it's an ego-centered approach to getting rid of the problem. Well, we're all one, so end of problem. You have to see the separation. If you don't see the separation with a lot of depth, you could say, or a lot of the quality of not actually knowing what it is you're looking at, instead of having a conclusion around it, which is another artificial separation based on fear. We can't stand to not know what that is, so we conclude. And there are different, that perception impulse seems to have an instantaneity, did I say that? Seems to have an instantaneous aspect to it, like with coming around the corner and seeing the back of this Buddha figure. Somebody's sitting in that chair. For a while I thought it was her. It wasn't. Never was her. And then there's another aspect to it where it seems to take a while. One can spend their whole life working with an impulse that keeps firing over and over and over. One continuously votes Republican. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to go into politics. But you know what I'm talking about. Once you come to a conclusion, you stop investigating. You don't need to do that. You can actually be in the dark. I highly recommend it. I couldn't teach if I was teaching out of some kind of light. Yeah. I just want to share my Buddha nature with you. It's baloney. It's not even meat. It's more like bad vegetables, yes.
Could you talk more about seeing the separation and what that looks like and how that helps with...
The way it helps is that you understand your causes and conditions as an apparent individual, and the causes and conditions that rise as someone else, like one of your sons, that is none of your business. That doesn't mean that you don't keep them from playing with broken glass or say, I wouldn't go that direction if I were you. But you basically don't meddle with them. And if you are continually meddling with yourself and trying to make yourself into something in order to feel better about yourself, then you probably are going to do that same thing to others. More? Good question.
So in seeing the separation between yourself and others and trying not to meddle...
Seeing that you're meddling is how it's done. Trying not to meddle,
right.
It's really hard to not meddle. Yeah. But you can see that you're meddling, and that's the beginning of it. Go ahead.
How does that relate to the no-self?
It doesn't say there isn't something there. It's just not a singularity of someone over here, someone over there. This person's doing pretty good, that person's not doing so good. We need to help the poor. Those kind of separations that have powerfully idealistic and good heartfelt intentions. But it is a misunderstanding of what? It's a misunderstanding of dependent origination. The teaching of the Buddha from 2,500 years ago. Everything is dependently arisen. There are no separate beings anywhere. There's separations, but fundamentally not separate. It's, you can't go so far as to say, well then, isn't this just one thing? No, because anytime you have one, you create something else. You can't get the number one without something else. The computer experts know about that. Yes, Michael?
How would you work with attachment and non-attachment to the perception?
Just look at it. If you struggle with it, or you push on it, or you try to correct it, you buy into the very nature of dependent origination, where one is blindfolded by that activity. So you buy into that you actually get lost in that. Whereas if you do nothing with it, then the consciousness is you're just aware of the movement. You're just aware of coming and going. And it's called choiceless. If you're making choices based on some kind of process of thinking, evaluating what's best, what's going to work best for everybody, it's not that might not be relatively correct in a lot of situations, but it's still circular. If you try to get peace, you're going to have war. War and peace are life and death, confusion and clarity, Buddhas, sentient beings, polarities. Don't do it. And how do you don't do it? You see how much you do it, and then it backs off of its own. You don't need to stop doing something.
Is perception impulse the skandha where receiving becomes producing? Do all the skandhas have that dynamic?
Well, since they're broken down into parts in order to get a better feeling for what's happening, probably some of that's happening. Just like seeing something, we're immediately adding on to what we're seeing. Smelling something, we're immediately adding on. So consciousness is not has that kind of it's making associations at, you could say, lightning speed, so that we can't even track it. That's why this perception impulse is interesting, because you can actually watch this coming around the corner, and the rope is a snake kind of thing. You see it, and you realize you go to one place, and then you realize, no, that's not that. So it backs out of itself, so to speak. Further question? Sure.
An example of the rope and the snake is seeing the rope more correct than seeing the snake there?
So I think the way I would respond to that is it's not about being correct. I mean, I understand what you're saying there, but the perception and if you go into right and wrong about any situation like that, then you'll always be on the lookout. You become paranoid about everything. So I don't know, maybe you could ask the question in a different way.
It seems like when we're looking at how we project onto things, it kind of suggests that if we just see the rope, or you just walk in the room and see the Buddha and not someone else, then that's more valid or less producing. And I'm wondering if what's being pointed at in the teachings is even more beyond that.
I don't know. How's it look to you?
I have another question.
How about my question? How's it look to you?
I don't know.
Okay, good. Go ahead. What's your question?
Is the rope a form of projection?
Well, everything is we're projecting everything as being other or something else. So if that's where you're going with that. Even the rope. Because a rope is what? Made up of something. Strands. Well, then it's a bundle of strands. Like this is a bundle of fingers. No, it's a hand. You know, the naming quality of everything is rampant. It's all over the place. And it's not about getting rid of anything. It's just about seeing clearly what this is. And I can tell you in a couple of words what it is, but you have to see it. And it's not about, I say it over and over, don't believe a word I say. I'm not here to tell you the truth. I'm here to point to where you might want to look to see it. And that is not separate. So when we do that, we have to look at the apparent separations. Some of those separations are terrifying, yes.
So it seems like we're pointing to an area where we're projecting onto like a projection that's already happened, What's important about that particular area of the projection?
Just because there's an interval there where that shows up, where you can work with it, just like when you're sitting down, practicing skandhas, practicing meditation, you might sit there and just see the wall, see the bumps on the wall for a while, and then something comes up, and then you just notice the contrast between something that comes up, and a moment ago there was just the bumps on the wall, and you were adding and subtracting and dividing and judging and evaluating that, and then it moves to a different, but there's one thing that doesn't change. Find out what it is. It's not somebody. Sir?
I'm trying to get a little more clear about what exactly meddling is. Can you give me a little more of an example of what that looks like? Or,
Yeah.
I guess before you
Go
answer,
ahead, go ahead.
I'm wondering if meddling could actually look like turning away from something.
Could. Yes, it could.
In that, it seems like there's a lot of dynamics to what meddling is.
Oh, my goodness, yeah, you can take it, my badness, you can take it all kinds of directions. It doesn't have a direction. This is why trying to be good and try to avoid evil just causes more circularity. It's like positive and negative. You can't have positive without negative. This is not validating evil deeds. I'm not saying that, but the polarity is what needs to be seen, and not the rightness or the wrongness of it. Even though we work with, like, our 16 precepts are about do good, don't do harm. But, pardon me, we need some kind of a conceptual touchstone for us to function at all. Because it's about being more aware. Shouldn't you?
Is the impulse itself a perception?
It seems, I think the way it's set up and the way I'm understanding is that we receive something and then we have an impulsive production. We do something or think something or assume something or react to something. So there's some kind of a movement happening. I'm not saying there aren't other pilot fish that come and grab onto the initial impulse that do something else with it, some other activity, because it's complicated in that way. You don't have to see all of them or pick them all out or label them, but you kind of notice that it's pretty complicated with the way thoughts move. You can't actually find the thought. We all agree, everybody here has thoughts. Thoughts come and go, but you can't really see them. We kind of know what they do, create confusion, but we don't know what they are. Is a thought? Is a thought? Is that something? Is that something in consciousness? That's the way it's taught. Thoughts arise in consciousness, and we are taught to, or it's recommended that we just watch what's coming and going rather than get attached to it or reject it by attachment or cling to it by attachment or ignore it by attachment. So that whole area can get pretty crowded with various kinds of energies going different ways. The less you do, the more you'll see. The more you receive, the less you'll do. But if you do receive and start producing, that production will come out of what's traditionally called Mahavipassana, or panoramic awareness, an incredible and powerful and all-pervasive awareness of the entire mandala that you're in, which might just be this room, but you don't miss much here. That doesn't mean you're collecting information. It's not even information. It's just a deep understanding that goes beyond this and that. It goes beyond the polarized way of knowing things, beyond the intellectual way of knowing things. Not getting rid of intellect. We need it. We can't get in here. We can't build a house. We can't sew our clothes. Yes, sir.
But could that look like meddling?
Anything can look like meddling.
Panoramic awareness.
Yeah, it can. Especially if you think you have panoramic awareness. You're actually meddling with your Buddha nature because you not just you, but then you prefer a credential about it rather than the actual Buddha nature. The actual Buddha nature is not a credential. It needs to be pointed to, or we can't talk to it. Somebody 2,500 years ago pointed to it. Other people there said, tell me more. And then he pointed to it again. Tell me more. How does it look? Then he started talking about the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 links in the chain of existence, dependent origination, the various realms or states of consciousness, yes.
Do you use meddling as a teaching tool?
Yeah. I say don't meddle.
More as a, like, in your interpersonal student-teacher relationships? As a teacher, do you not meddle?
Do I not meddle? I meddle all the time. I'm meddling with all of you. I'm sure you've noticed. I'm sure you've noticed. I meddled with you so much you even left once. And then you thought, that wasn't so bad, I think we'll go ahead. He's not that mean. Well, yeah, I'm just saying that you can't get away. You know, you can't get away from any of that activity. Anytime you say, I don't do that, you're lying.
Are you,
Keep coming.
Are you
This
saying-
helps me teach when I have
are
a
you
student.
Are you saying that there could be clarity within meddling?
Meddling is clarity
How is meddling clarity?
when it's not meddling. Okay, I'll say it more clearly. When there's no meddler. If there's a meddler, that's meddling. But if the meddling is happening just out of the nature of perception, the nature of perception, but not impulse, not conclusion, just perception. In the Yogacara teachings, which I'm sure you've heard, all of you have heard, probably, there's perception only. Impulse is the otherness of it. The impulse is the subjectivity of it, or the objectivity. Subjectivity and objectivity, I mean, even though this is incredibly cinemascope, technicolor, and high relief, and high definition, and there's a few other words there that are pretty fancy, it's intensely real, but it's not separate. And if you realize that, then you get to participate in the intense separation of everything, of things coming this way, and going that way, and smelling great, and smelling terrible. All you get to participate, you're no longer at war with anything. Your most negative thoughts and feelings are allowed to come and go, and because they can't find a self. They can't find a center of interest or disinterest. I'm not saying there isn't some interest or curiosity comes and goes, but never leads to anything. It is just there incidentally. And if one is on this path, one is about saving all beings. How do you do that? Start with your own thought patterns. Stop objecting to your emotions, your feelings. Don't even agree with them. Don't agree. Don't object. Don't look away. This is the three poisons. This is a basic teaching of Buddha Dharma.
But so are you saying by, let me try to reiterate in my words, but by virtue of awareness, you're both meddling and not meddling at the same time?
Yes. So people who are meddling that are actually just meddling are people who think they're doing good. They're not really aware that they're meddling. Whereas someone who's aware that they're meddling is genuine. They're genuine because they're no longer trying to correct anything. They're all done with doing it. All done with trying to control every damn thing that happens, or be responsible for it, or be to blame, or someone else is to blame. It's just a huge Coney Island of the mind, where everything is entertainment and a lot of difficulty if you happen to work there.
Are the impulses that show up here the only ones that I can observe?
You could get a groundhog. You could see it. You could see it in others, if that's what you're asking. You could see it in, and you could see it, in Danny. Possibly some of your you might be able to see it in me. You might be able to see it in other people here, if that's what you're asking me.
You pointed to the otherness of the impulse.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if the only impulses we can work with or look at fundamentally are our own.
Well, the way you're asking it, I would say, yeah, just work with your own. Not that you couldn't see others happening, but working with your own, that's to see the way in which you keep stepping aside from what is in front of you. You're looking at the truth, and we cover it up with impulse, where the perception is accurate. You're seeing, go ahead, you,
Is there a quality of dependent origination to impulse?
no. But you, so you don't have to agree with it or object to it or do anything with it other than just be aware of it, because it will get bright blue and it'll turn to a pale shade of yellow without you doing anything. Things are just changing all the time, and yet nothing's really happening in the fundamental sense.
In perception only, does impulse always follow?
The way it's being taught, perception impulse, so we see something and then we add, subtract, divide, come to a conclusion, come to a exclusion. We do something with everything. But,
That wasn't really what I wanted to ask. If you see perception only, then does the impulse that follows come from a different perspective, or?
could come from anywhere, could show up in any causes and conditions or dependently arisen, so there could be any kind of source. I don't have much interest in the relative source of something, or who did this, or why is this happening. Anytime, yesterday I was talking about the why questions. Anytime you say why, actual investigation of what is that, stops and we go towards the circularity of cause and effect, or why, because, why, because. So that may happen, but when the awareness is, when just the space in which things occur, that space itself is fine with thoughts happening, it's fine without thoughts happening, it notices thoughts, you could say it in a relative way. It also notices there aren't any thoughts, but it doesn't claim like I'm not thinking. There's no one making any claims about it. So if whatever's happening with you, if you're claiming anything about it, you're actually moving away from your birthright, your Buddha nature. Not about just Buddhism. Buddhism is just a way of talking about this. This is pointed out in other ways that not called Buddha nature. It's called the truth. And you get to see it. And there's nothing to believe or disbelieve, yes.
If there's no one having the impulse, then is it just coming out of the situation, as you were saying?
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't look like there's identities everywhere, especially somebody who is really extremely narcissistic, or someone who is going the other way, someone who's really, really giving, just wants to be helping people constantly. There's powerful identities happening there. And they're doing things that are confusing and difficult, and they're doing things that are relatively helpful and good. Those are mundane approaches, even though they might claim spirituality. Some people really claim a lot of spirituality, and they're flat in the dirt. Dirt's good though, especially really clean dirt. Yes.
A question from Vishal in San Jose.
Vishal.
Should there be any effort to keep eyeballs still and control blinking?
Still and controlled, but
Control blinking.
No, just count your blinks. Or count somebody else's blinks. I'm sure you've noticed some people just talk when they're just constantly blinking. You think, what is that about? You need some eye wash. I don't know. I would say that any movement could be observed. So if you're doing sitting meditation, you're sitting symmetrical, and you notice that your eye blinks are increasing, you could just hang out with that for a while, and rather than go to why, just go to what is it? What's happening? So I'm not sure exactly the context that you're asking it about. Sometimes if it's just one eye blink, you're actually winking at someone. What do you want? Keelan.
With perception impulse, is there always familiarity with the impulse?
That's good. There's gonna be some there, or there won't be an impulse. So there's gonna be some kind of a recognition, like the recognition, you're coming in a room that there shouldn't be anybody else there, and yet you see a form sitting in a chair, and you think there's somebody sitting there instead of, oh, that's just a piece of sculpture or something, or that's just a silhouette of a cardboard cutout of a movie star leaning against the wall. Isn't that what it was? So there's going to be some of that. More about that, though?
Well, what happens on something that's like a deeper level when tears come to your eyes and you're not sure what that is?
Good one. So you're talking about you're not doing much and suddenly you have deep emotions?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's your problem. So that, I would say just, if that occurs, just observe it. You don't need to conclude. That might be what that's about. You don't need to conclude anything. But it's a way of understanding that shows up with an emotional dynamic to it. And it can get more intense and it can back off. Also, that means nothing. Michael?
Is there a way to get past attachment?
Yeah, what?
Get past attachment?
Probably, you could, if that was your goal, you probably could get free of it. But it's not necessary to do that, and it only works for as long as you're working on your particular exercise of not being attached. What is necessary from this perspective is you have to see the attachment. Don't do anything. Don't detach. Don't let go. I never say just let go to anyone, including myself. I just don't have to let go of anything. Just look. If you look at the attachment, I do this all the time. If you look at the way in which, if you try to let this go without examining the way in which you're attached, then it just gets painful. Or else you'll have an artificial attachment that looks something like this. I finally let go. I feel much better. You're totally ignoring the attachment. And the only time the attachment comes back is when something that resonates with this, which might be another person's face, which might be another person's voice or something you're saying, suddenly you realize you've got a tight stranglehold on what it is that is being triggered by that other person. So, but if you're aware of the attachment, then your awareness is, you're just present with that. And so you don't have a personal kind of self-centered agenda about being a person who's not attached. So you have a willingness to be genuine. That's, I mean, if the attachment is that you can let go of it, then of course let go. But don't do it as some kind of a methodology to be a better, higher, greater person. It's a misunderstanding. That being said, if you really see the attachment and see the way in which, I'm just using my digits here to show you there's lots of ways to hang, you need all those, you can't just hang on. That's not very good. Oh, you're so attached. Not really. But this is deep, and this could be, every one of those could be a lifetime. And I'm not blaming you or accusing you of having past lives. You don't need my pointer to know that. Every life you've ever lived is in this room. And you know it. How do you know it? Because it's not information.
Some follow-up from Vishal. It sounds like this is happening during meditation practice.
Okay.
His blinking increases to a very fast pace, and his eyes wiggle like the whole world is shaking.
So this is what's happening while he, is this a he? Okay. While he's sitting still, the eyes are going like this.
It sounds like it.
Oh. I wouldn't do anything with it. Let him wiggle. Hold everything you can. Hold everything still and symmetrical that you can, without struggle. In other words, without trying to maintain anything, and then watch what continues to move. Sometimes, with some people, I have one student, she shall remain nameless, who has what are called in the Hindu tradition or in other yogic tradition, kriyas, or spontaneous body movements. I've had some of that. Happens once in a while. It's not a credential. It doesn't mean that you're somehow beyond everybody else, but you should allow it to happen. This person is still not really allowing that to happen because they're, I don't know what is actually happening, but maybe a little embarrassed about it. Could be. I mean, nobody wants to sit in the room where everybody looks like a perfect Buddha, and you're going. I don't think they're doing that. Because I would agree with that. Don't do that. But I mean, some kind of spontaneous movement, and that eye movement, if that's coming up, you know, seriously, I'm thinking that probably should give that some room, Vishal, and just allow that to be that. And if it's really, and I don't know if Vishal has a teacher, perhaps you should talk to your teacher if you have one. But my recommendation, if someone was having something like that, as I understand it, because there might be aspects to it that I'm not getting, but I would say, especially if you're sitting as much as people sit here, sitting every day for several hours, don't do anything with it for a few weeks, a few months, and then at some point change and go the other direction, and then endeavor to shut it down, and then watch the contrast. That's what I would say. And then even that would be something I would probably talk to that person about. Same as with spontaneous body movements. Someone's trying to sit very still and very symmetrical, and their body starts to move it on its own. I would say, watch that movement. That's about your body-mind connection. It's not a bad thing. It's just something. Yes.
Is that movement impulse?
Probably. But all you have to do is be aware of it. You don't have to stop. I mean, I couldn't teach. I was totally impulsive. I mean, you're just, I have no idea what I'm going to say. So you could say, is that impulse? Somewhat. But there's no real agenda behind it other than to save all beings, help you in the fundamental way that I've been helped by my teachers and by this teaching. Yes?
Is impulse something that backs off and increases?
It can do it either one. And the interesting thing, and you'll be very aware of what it's doing, but you won't have a preference. You'll just notice it's getting stronger, and then you notice it's getting weaker. But you don't add, you know what I'm talking about. You do this all the time. You're the perfect example of that. Aren't you? Yeah. Don't need to correct anything. Just be genuine. Be who you are. Be this person who's come into this lifetime with this baggage and that baggage and that baggage. Don't worry about it. If I worried about baggage, I'd have killed myself a long time ago. I would have blown. I tried to do that, but I met Trump-Rinpoche when I was 33, and I was just loading my gun. Go ahead.
If we start to see impulse increasing and we have the contrast of a memory of maybe a time where it felt like things were a lot more settled, is that a lie?
It's probably ignorance, but I would pounce on it and say, take it another direction. I would just let it do what it needs. It would get larger and smaller and more intense, noisier, or it'll back off. It'll go away for 3 weeks and then come back. None of your business. And why is it none of your business? There isn't anyone. As soon as you make something your business, that reinforces that person who knows about that and creates a knower of that particular item. I know this, I know that. It's not that you can't know something, it's the grasping it as self. That using that kind of knowledge to build up the one who knows something. Go ahead.
How can we not kill our thoughts but also not agree with them?
Just observe them. It's just like watching clouds. Some clouds are kind of homely and wrinkly looking, like old men. And some clouds are quite graceful and fluffy and have a little bit of sunlight hitting them, like Unyo. And so you just observe them. You notice the contrast. Artists, musicians can't work unless they're really, you could say, objective about contrast. This is why we get music comes out of nowhere that we've never heard music like that, or we've never seen artwork like that before, because it's revolutionary, because the person who is producing that has gone deeply into the formal structure of that without grasping or rejecting. They actually see the waveforms come together to provide us with some kind of new insight into something that you can't put words on. It's like, you like this musician, and you like, don't particularly care for this one, and this particular kind of music evokes something that is like, you don't know of anything that has that kind of flavor, and yet all they've got is a piano or a guitar or vocal cords. And yet you never heard that before. And when they're gone, you'll never hear it again, because it's uniquely individual. True with any of the arts.
If the question, where does that come from, keeps showing up with the impulse, how can I look at that without meddling with it?
I think just to ask that question tells me that you're doing fine. Just continue to do that. It might also show up like meddling with this. I keep wanting something else. I want to change this. Just watch that. It will wear out if you. When I say don't meddle, I know you can't help it. I can't help it. But if you're clear about the degree of that, then you get to not only see the stage set, you get to see everything that's on stage. You get to see everybody in the front row. You get to see the entire panorama that we call me. You see everything. And you don't see it as a person in the 13th century, but you don't miss that either, because you're no longer excluding anything. You no longer care about being somebody special. And amazingly, you become extremely special, maybe not to yourself, because there isn't anyone. There's no accumulation. Fear of death is gone because you're no longer afraid of life. You're not afraid to live and die, because you're no longer selective about anything. This doesn't mean that the selectivity doesn't come right to a point occasionally, just like when I come up to this altar, I'm extremely picky about how that looks. I can put my socks on backwards and not be too worried about it. Do you ever do that? Put your socks on backwards? So, but coming up here, it's not that there's a right and a wrong up here, it's just that working with that form helps me. I'm not correcting that so that I can make people wrong. I'm not even correcting it. I know I'm going to be sitting down here in a few moments and talking to you, and I want to make sure that I'm looking at what is arising here and here. One more question if you have it.
Would you say it helps you in the sense that it brings you into the room, into what's happening?
I would say it brings the room into me. No, you're right. It brings me into the room. Well, Senshu here. Where's Senshu? In heaven? I saw her here with her little boy. That's your little boy, right? I hope so. Okay. I'm just saying, what I'm saying, being silly, but I'm just saying, sometimes it shows up one, and sometimes it shows up the other, and you don't really miss the other way. The right and wrong part of the thing is gone. It's just this, and then it's that. It's like arguing with night and day. We don't do that. Arguing with life and death, we do. We argue with it intensely. We don't want death. We want life, and we want it served a particular way. Go ahead.
It is an off question, I think, but as an artist, is there something that you do that has a semblance of fixing the altar that you might do before you start a piece, or for inspiration, or to
Make drawings?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm making drawings right now for this Buddha that's going to go in the yoga studio. We're going to have a Buddha, so it will roll out of the back room where the temporary kampa is, with all the Tibetan altar is there. That will come out into the yoga studio that you basically built. Put the floor on. I think you did drywall and the ceiling and all the doors and windows, and that probably belongs to you. You did all that. Anyway, that's going to be at some point. We haven't announced this yet, but at some point, or did we? No. So then I'll stop announcing. At some point, that might show up as a more public space, because this is a private monastery here, and so it'd be easier for public to come into that on Sundays. So we'll see what happens, but that's what, when you ask that question, I'm thinking of all the drawings I've been doing of ways of creating around this new Buddha, creating images around this, just like we're going to be doing images in here. In fact, Mayun is working on paintings for that will go in based on the altar, based on the life of the Buddha. I assume that's what she's doing. She's in France. I can't check up on her.
I guess I'm curious if there's a more particular personal approach that you use to begin any new artwork.
I can't think of anything. Other than that, I like to look at artwork. And I have a painting by Charles, he's from Birchfield, who was a painter from the last century, on the wall right above the TV screen. And much more fun to look at the Birchfield than the TV screen. So sometimes looking at that and listening to the words is coming on. But today I was telling Unyo, I says, I think I'm going to go up and get out my paint and go up and darken that one area. Lighten it up a little bit.
You're going to fix his painting.
Huh?
You're going to fix his
I was
painting.
going to fix his painting. So, I'm probably not going to do that. Not because I don't want it, because I'm lazy. Too much work. But it'll be interesting. I thought about getting a piece of paper and painting that and putting that up there. And, artists do that. You knew that. You're an artist. Kind of. Don't you teach art? You ever do that with a painting? Does anyone who paints you ever see an area and you don't want to really put paint in there because it might have gone too far, and then you've got a whole lot of messy correcting to do. But if you just paint a piece of paper and put that there, sometimes that helps. And then Danny and I are going to start teaching life drawing classes. Isn't that true? Oh, I didn't tell you about that.
I don't know if I'm gonna be doing.
She's also an artist, and so I think it would be nice to use the yoga studio as a place to do not only yoga and not only meditation, but also do some life drawing over there. That would be great. You think that'd be a good idea? Yeah.
Yeah, this town needs
Yeah.
a place like that.
Would you come over here and teach the class?
Yeah, you just respond. It's like you teaching, you just kind of respond to what's in front of you.
Got it. That's it.
Right?
Okay.
Sense, feel, and their object.
We'll set it up and you'll have to come.